Hello, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about two related topics. One is about sadness and what we can do about sadness and grief and bereavement and loss. And another topic is going to be about listening. How do we listen well when we encounter people who are distressed, who need to talk, who might be sad? Just some simple skills to help us really listen well, because quite often we don't listen as well as we might for all sorts of reasons. So, help when life is sad. And quite often life has its sad moments. We don't live in a perfect world. There are many things that can make us sad, whether we've just had a bad day at work or whether we've lost someone we love, and all kinds of sadnesses and losses in between. And sometimes we don't realize that we've had losses because maybe it's not a bereavement and we don't recognize that a job change, a house move, other aspects of our life can also be different kinds of loss that can lead to sadness that we need to attend to. So here's a distress cycle. So when we're sad and we're not comforted, or we're stressed and that's not soothed, then our body releases stress hormones, and that stops us from listening to others, caring for them, showing empathy, being compassionate, because we're so busy protecting ourselves, keeping ourselves safe, dealing with our own issues. And when that area of our brain is blocked, then we're actually much more likely to hurt someone else by what we do, to perhaps ignore their needs because we're so busy with ours. And when we don't attend to others' needs, then they can get stressed and upset and distressed. And that can block their ability to be empathic towards us and to be concerned for us. And so if we're not careful, when things start to get stressed or there are sadnesses, then we can actually get a bit lost and alone and feel more and more distressed because people are not able to care for us and we're not able to care for others. Fortunately, the body also has another cycle that can come into place. And when someone cares for us, or we feel God cares for us, or we experience care in any kind of way, then oxytocin is released into our body, which makes us feel good. It's that warm glow of love and affection and joy and peace all rolled into one. And when that is released in our body, it enables us to listen to others, to be empathic towards them, to be compassionate to what they're going through, their sadnesses, their needs, helps us to listen better and more effectively and caringly. We care for others, and when we care for them, and they start to feel better too. The goal is to actually inspire their bodies to release oxytocin when we care for them, because that's part of the healing process. Those hormones help us to feel better, to have hope, to feel cared for, and to care for others. So it's important to be aware of what's going on in our body. It's not just I feel sad, I feel happy, I want to care for you, I feel afraid and stressed. These things have an effect throughout the way we relate and also between us in our relationships. So Jesus said, "Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted." And that's something to be aware of, that the Bible over and over again tells us that when we're sad, we need comfort, which is not rocket science, but often we don't get the comfort that we need. And sometimes it's because we don't show that we're mourning, we don't show our sadness. But when we do show our sadness, it's an opportunity and an invitation for other people to comfort us and help us to feel better again. It's really interesting that God, in the Psalms, we have this verse that seems to suggest that God tracks all of our sorrows and collects all our tears in a bottle, and everyone is recorded in God's book. And this is poetic, but it's David's way of saying, you know what, God attends to our sadness. He notices when we're sad. And it's important for us to pay attention to other people's sadness too. So I imagine maybe somewhere there is a bottle that says Karen's tears, and maybe one day God and I will pour it out on the floor and he will give me a big hug. That's what I imagine. But the important thing is that a loving person takes care of all of our tears. When we went through a very sad time, my husband and I, when we lost a child, we decided that I would never cry on my own. We would always cry together, because then I could be comforted. Because if I started to cry on my own, that could cause more distress. So this is something that we decided to do together. So it's important to be sad with, to not be sad alone, as I just mentioned. And Paul says, mourn with those who mourn, be sad with those who are sad. And all of these principles that I'm sharing are really important principles that research today shows us are important in relationships. Sad people need to be comforted. And there are many, many interesting techniques and ideas about how to deal with trauma and sadness. But the way that humanity has always done this, before we had counseling and research and psychologists, was to listen to people's story when they are sad, to be there to comfort them, to come and sit with them where they are, and so that they are not sad alone. Because when we share our sadness, it is really healing when people come alongside and care for us. And the good news is that one day all of our tears will be wiped from our eyes. The crying won't go on forever. And there's also something really personal about this verse. God will wipe every tear from our eyes. It's not just there will be no more tears, but God is personally involved in the comforting process of the sadness that we have gathered on earth. And another part of the comfort is to be comforted ourselves. And if there's no one to comfort us, Paul tells us, you know what, you can go to God. He is the Father of all compassion. He's the one who comforts us in all our troubles. So we can comfort those in any trouble with the comfort we get from God. And again, that's this important principle. Unless we have been truly comforted at some point by God, by other human beings who care for us, it's very difficult for us to comfort others. In fact, the research is indicating that when children are not comforted when they're young, up until the age of 3, if they live without people who care for their sadness, who respond when they cry, if they experience abuse and pain, when they are about 3, the brain prunes away the things that don't seem to have been useful. And if they haven't received empathy strongly before they were 3, then that part of the brain is pruned away, because the brain thinks that wasn't useful, I don't need it. And when they do brain scans on these children who have not had comfort, then the empathy area of their brain is just a black space, which is really frightening. So it's very important that we comfort sadness, especially in children and boys as well as girls, because also when boys are not comforted, we actually shape their brains to be more likely, not necessarily inevitably so, but they're more likely to be less empathic to others and maybe more prone to violence and aggression. So comfort is the best cure for grief, and we do that by listening with compassion, and I'll be speaking about that later. Comforting and caring for people so that they can feel comforted and soothed, and the stress in their life and their distress can be soothed. When we pour compassion into their pain, they can begin to find healing and hope again. And just to know that someone cares, someone comes alongside you and gives you a hug or listens or cares or makes you a cup of tea, can be an incredible comfort in the middle of grief. And it's also a good way to deal with past stories, trauma, not just the current hurts in our life, but our trauma stories from the past. They also need to be comforted in some way. If they're too traumatic to tell, then we can talk about the effect that's had on their lives, or we can just say, you know, something really sad happened in my past, and I'd love you to hold me and comfort me to make me feel better about those things that happened. So when we comfort something, it's like the memory is wrapped in a warm blanket. And so the next time the person thinks about that thought, and perhaps the trauma memory is triggered by something, there's not just the pain of that. It's not just a sharp thorn in their heart, in their mind, that has been wrapped in comfort. And when they go there again, they will remember, Karen comforted me then, or Thomas comforted me then. And that memory of that comfort will help that trauma to be less painful in their lives. Now, as a family therapist, I've often worked with very distressed families. And one thing that we do is we make a menu, we call it a comfort menu, and we write a list of all the ways people like to be comforted in the family. Because sometimes people maybe feel a little bit uncomfortable about comfort because they feel it's maybe touchy-feely, it's tissues and tears and lots of sadness, and they're not quite sure what to do. But actually, a lot of things can bring us comfort when we are sad. So when families make this list, there are things on there like watching a funny YouTube clip with me, playing my favorite game, going for a walk, making my favorite dinner, someone bringing me my favorite drink, giving me a hug, or just listening. So there's all sorts of ways that people in a family can be comforted. And so the family makes this list, this comfort menu, and they put it somewhere like on their fridge. And everyone has a different shaped magnet, maybe with their initial or something that represents them. And so if someone's feeling sad, they can go and put their magnet on the comfort menu and say, this is what I need today, even if they can't find the words. Or actually, just by making a comfort menu, it helps families to be more open, to learn how to talk and say, you know what, I'm having a rough day and it would really help me if someone would do this. That would really comfort me. And so it can often give them the language, the invitation, the understanding that when we're sad, we need comforting. It's not, because again, it's not rocket science. It's just a natural response to people being sad. But we can be encouraged and comforted in many different ways. One day I asked my youngest son, who was then about 15, and I said, what do I do that really comforts you when you've had a bad day and you come home from school and everything's gone wrong? And he's actually, although he's a lot taller than me and he was 15, he quite liked to come home and have a hug from mum every now and then. But this day he said something different, something I didn't know. And he said, you know what makes me feel really comforted? He said, Mum, it's when you make me a big mug of hot chocolate and you pour a squirt of cream on the top. And then you put chocolate sprinkles on, and then marshmallows and a chocolate stick, and you give me a chocolate chip cookie. Wow. Well, yeah, I don't know how many calories is in all of that, but what I do know is that that's what made Joel feel really comforted when I would pay him that attention and give him this wonderful hot chocolate. Interestingly, now I have grandchildren, and my youngest grandchild, who's about 6, he will come down really early in the morning to me and say, Grandma, make me that special hot chocolate. And he's not particularly sad, but I make it anyway because it will make him feel better, whatever he's feeling. Sometimes a helpful thing that we can do, either when we're all alone or there's nobody with us, is imagine that God or a person who loves us very much is hugging us close to their heart. And sometimes I do this when there's nobody around and I'm in a stressful situation or a sad situation. I will just imagine that I'm being hugged. I can say there are times in my life when I feel like a child clambering into God's lap, and I imagine him giving me a big hug and patting me on the back like a child and saying, there, Karen, you just rest. I care for you. I'm comforting you. And he rocks me on his lap and I can hear his heartbeat, and he just whispers kind and encouraging things to me. And even just imagining a hug can help us to feel better, to help stimulate that oxytocin that can really help. And we can take some deep breaths and relax into that imaginary hug, or we can even give ourselves a warm and comforting hug with our own arms, and you can do it right where you are now, because that can also be something that can soothe and calm us. Even if no one is there to give us a hug, we can imagine a hug, or we can give ourselves a hug. I was in a museum in America one time where they had actually products for the future, and they had a warm fleecy hoodie, and it was specially wired that someone could call you on your phone with a special code, and this whole hoodie would hug you warmly as if they were there with you. And it was being designed for people who work remotely in maybe lighthouses or in remote science stations and things like that. So they were creating a garment that would give people a warm hug. You know, it's really important to talk about our feelings and our grief and our loss, and help so that people can understand it, listen to it, and comfort it. Sometimes people just don't know how to listen to that. They're a bit afraid that if you talk about your sadness, they will say or do the wrong thing. So it's quite important to tell people how to listen. And some people can listen well because they're good at it, and other people might just shy away because they don't know. So it's helpful to say, look, I would really like to talk about the sad things, and I don't need you to do anything or say anything. I just need you to be there, to have a cup of tea with me while I talk. And when I got to the end, all I need is that you'll give me a hug, and I know that you've heard and that you care. And maybe also if someone wants to talk to you and they want to tell you a sad story, you could say, you know what, I want to listen to your sad story really well. So tell me how I can listen best. When I've heard your story, what can I do to help you feel better? Would you like a hug? Would you like me to sum up your story? Tell me what I've heard, or just how would you like me to listen? And this can be really useful. I even use this technique when I'm not sad with my husband, because he will often be really wanting to show his love by helping me. Sometimes I just need him to listen. So I will say, I just want you to listen, Bernie. And when I've done, just give me a hug. And that can save a lot of frustration and confusion. Spending time walking in nature can also be very comforting. There's something about being outside, the exercise, the fresh air, the sunlight, just the wonder of things around us, the bird song, and the smells of the woodland, especially now in the autumn when the leaves are falling and decaying. And it's really comforting just to be in nature, either on your own or with someone, and just let the wonder of nature and creation soak in. Jesus said, you know, look at the birds and flowers, how well they are taken care of, and let yourself know that you are much more precious than them. You are also being taken care of. So walking in nature can actually be very comforting. In grief, people can sometimes slow down and get stuck and feel like they can't achieve anything. And it's okay if they don't. You know, sometimes we feel we're only valuable when we can do things, but we are human beings and we're valuable just because we exist, because we are. That's precious. But if life is challenging, it's helpful to write down 3 little things that went well each day, however small, or positive things that you notice, or little achievements, to help you feel like you're climbing out of the big pit of sadness. Because when you're sad, every small achievement is quite enormous, because often our bodies get really slowed down in that time, and it's harder for us to do the things we could do before. We compare ourselves and feel like we're not good enough or we're not achieving, and actually we're doing amazing things by in small ways that we need to recognize. Even if someone has died, they are still special to us, and we don't stop loving them. And so their memories they stay in our heart, and we can remember them, and we can still let the love that we remember from them be felt in our heart. We can have our happy memories of them, remember their hugs, their love, their gifts to us. And we can even imagine they're telling us how much they love us, or we are telling them how much we love them. We know that they don't know this, that they are not aware that, they're dead, but yet thinking about them, filling our heart with that, thinking about the words they would say to us and the hugs they gave us, can still bring us comfort, and the comfort that they would love to give us if they were really here. So we can continue to love people even when they are no longer with us. And that can be healing for our heart. The love doesn't stop because they are no longer here. Another thing that is interesting is that we can say hello again to someone who is no longer in our life. Again, that doesn't mean that we think they're alive somewhere. It means that we can have different kinds of conversations with them. So when we love someone, we often have conversations with them in our head. We might see something and we'll think, I wonder if Nathan would like that. So Nathan is my son. I wonder what Nathan would say if he were here with me right now, what he would like. So we have these conversations in our head, these thoughts about what people would say or do if they were with us. And even when someone has died, we can have these conversations with them in our heads because we're so familiar with what they might say. So if we're sad, we can imagine, what would they say to comfort you? And sometimes I use this when I'm working with people who are sad, and they'll say, I'm really sad because my mom isn't here anymore. And I'll say, I'm so sad that she's not here anymore. But if she were here right now and she knew how sad you were, what would she say to you? What would she tell you? There was a mother whose teenage son died, and she felt slightly responsible because she told him to come home on his bike that night instead of staying at his friend's. And on the way home, he was involved in a car accident and he sadly died. And she was very stuck because she felt somehow responsible for this. And several years later, she still had not gone back to work. She was not kind of moving on in her life. And so her therapist said to her, what would your son say if he were here right now? What would he say if he could see what's happening? And she thought for a moment and she actually smiled and she said, I know what he'd say. He'd say, hey, Mum, get back into your life. Go and enjoy things. Just be free to do that. You've been sad long enough. Go now and do something amazing. And actually, that's what she did. She suddenly felt more optimistic, more positive. She felt like she was released to go back and do what she wanted to do. But this is all in her imagination. It's not because someone is there or alive somewhere. It's the memory of what we know they would say to us if they were here. That can still be comforting. It's useful to find some new hobbies that takes our concentration and distracts us from the painful memories and echoing thoughts that can drag us down. And when we make things and paint or do whatever it is that is creative or that we enjoy doing, or better still, if we do those things with other people, it can give us joy, some peace, a sense of accomplishment. And even though you might not create an amazing picture, just playing with paint on paper or doing something with your hands can be very healing and beneficial. So those things that take all of our concentration, distract us from the pain and give our hearts a break from the sadness. I mentioned this when we were talking about joy, but it's particularly important when someone is sad or depressed or bereaved to think of 100 things that bring them joy. And although it's challenging, but to actually focus on 100 things that give them a sense of happiness, even tiny things, because it's the little tiny things every day that bring us joy that can add beauty and sparkle to our lives. So then we encourage them to go and try at least one thing every day. And this is to help them intentionally choose to engage with joy again and experience those positive moments. The joy, maybe not quite like this child, but I know that children have this amazing joy of jumping in a muddy puddle with a big splash. And even as an adult, I love jumping in the autumn leaves, particularly when they're all crunchy. And I love autumn. And this morning I was walking on acorns and feeling them crunch under my feet. And even that small thing can bring joy. So focusing on the small things that can bring joy is really helpful. And one of the best ways that we now know to experience joy and healing again in sadness is to start doing something kind for someone else. Because when we do kind things for others, we begin to look outwards again And it also activates our oxytocin cycle. So as much as we may need comfort from others, that's wonderful. But when we do the kind things, we also experience this oxytocin surge in our body that can help us to find joy again, to reach out to others and to help us heal from our sadness. So even small kindnesses, even thinking about kindness, planning a small kindness, even just picking up a card and writing a note to someone, a thank you note, or picking up one flower and putting it in a glass on a colleague's desk, really tiny, simple things. Even just giving something to a charity that you really admire can be very helpful in starting to help the brain re-engage with life, with oxytocin, with relating to others, thinking outside of our own sadness and thinking how to make others happy. So that's a natural way that the body can find healing, to start caring for others and doing what we can for them. And eventually, as we move out of grief, it's good to find a new purpose in life, like the mother did whose teenage son had died. Find a new purpose, a new reason to live, a new project that you can really get into that will give your life purpose and meaning. So that actually we could grow through the sadness and beyond it into a place where we can make even a bigger difference in the world, from the journey of understanding and grief and comfort and empathy that we've been through. That process of healing in us can help us to reach out and heal others. So find what you enjoy doing most, and then use whatever that is as a way to bless others and pass on the comfort, the joy, the caring, the kindness that will then spark their caring cycle, compassionate cycle of comfort and oxytocin and joy in their life. So those are just some things to help us deal with sadness. I haven't talked about the whole grief cycle and the pattern for that. I've been more practical about the things that can help people in their sadness and that are helping people to emerge into a new life beyond the sadness that has meaning and purpose and joy. And now I'm going to talk about the gift of listening well, which is somewhat related to the idea of comforting people in their sadness. And we all listen in different ways, and it's so easy to think you're listening and you're not even hearing. I remember one day my youngest child came up to me. I was in the kitchen and they must have been about 4 or 5. And they started to tell me about their day at school. And I was making dinner, and I was soon tuned out of the little story and was focusing on the food. And then at the end of his little story, he turned to me and he said, Mommy, what should I do now? And I'm thinking, do you know what? I didn't hear. I could hear the noise, but I was not listening to his words. And he was telling me a sad story about school and his friends, and he wanted to know how to make it better. And embarrassingly, I had to say to him, Joel, let's start all over again. Tell me the story from the beginning so I can hear it better this time. And because it's so easy just to tune people out, even when you know that they have a sad story to tell. And even though I try to be a caring mother, there are moments that we all have when we don't listen the way that we should. So in the Bible, James says listening is really important. He says, be quick to listen and slow to speak and slow to become angry. Quick to listen and slow to speak. And listening is so important. In listening, there is great wisdom. King Solomon said to speak without listening is stupid and rude. And he had a lot of people to listen to with all his wives, I'm guessing. But he said you first need to listen. In listening, you will find the wisdom to respond appropriately. And so when we listen, properly listen, we can find this wisdom that we need to care for others. Yes, here's this verse. Answering before listening is stupid and rude. We don't want to be stupid or rude. But sometimes we feel like, oh, we don't want to listen to the sad story. We just want to cut in there and fix things and make things better. But actually, sometimes we don't even know what it is. And we need to listen first, because that's respectful. I'm sure you know that the tone of voice is 38% of our total communication. That is massive. And so listening to people's voice, the tone of their voice can tell us a lot. And then their gesture, their actions, their facial expression, their posture, that tells us a massive amount too. And the words that we speak only are about 7% of what is actually communicated, but we need to focus very closely on that 7%. Sometimes we can get distracted by the other things, but also we need to remember that if we're listening to someone on the telephone, we don't have the 55% of that information, and it can actually be harder for us to focus. And it's useful to imagine them in our minds, imagine their gestures, their facial expressions, their posture, so that we can try and focus better on what they're saying to us, because we don't have all the information we normally have. So good communication happens when our tone of voice, our gesture and expression, and our verbal communication all come together. So we can tell someone that we care for them, and our tone of voice needs to be a tone that expresses that care, and our whole body needs to be behind that care. Otherwise, they don't really think that we're caring so much. So what stops us communicating? Well, deep communication and listening can take time and patience. Sometimes we want to do other things and we're distracted, and listening takes a lot of attention to the person who's speaking. And sometimes we don't know how long they're going to go on speaking for, and we might think, oh no, I need to go and do something else, and we lose the attention. Sometimes we're afraid to communicate deeply because we're afraid that other people will reject us when we talk about our thoughts and feelings, or that we'll be embarrassed. Or sometimes we don't know how to find the words to express what we're feeling. So when we listen, we give people the time to work out what they want to say. And as we're listening well, and they're trying to communicate, it helps them to work out what's going on inside. When we give them the attention, when we show respect and care, no matter what words they use, then it helps them to find their way to communicate. And if someone's distressed and they swear or use words you wouldn't normally use, let it go. It's just, they often don't have words for their pain, and we can just listen for the pain behind those. So too often we're hearing, but we're not listening. But being heard is so very healing, because when someone hears us, it shows that we are significant to them, that we are valued, and that they are respecting us. When someone listens to us well, it often helps to calm us down. When they really hear what we're trying to say, and they say, whoa, oh, that sounds really sad. And we sense that they really understand us. That is so calming. It is so accepting. You feel so understood. And the more we feel heard and understood, the less likely we are to feel distressed or get into an argument, because we feel safe and we feel cared for. And that lovely oxytocin cycle at the beginning is being engaged to help in the process of healing and listening and empathy. You know, when we interrupt people, they can feel so frustrated. I have a family member who interrupts me nearly every time I speak, and I just feel so frustrated. I feel like I don't even want to talk to you, because you're clearly not listening to me. You're just interrupting me all the time. And I feel sad, like this little cat. I might not show it on my face, but you know, kind of the way his ears are floppy, it's kind of something in me just sighs and thinks, is this really worth it? When we look away, people feel that they're not important to us. We're thinking about something else. They're not valued, and eye contact is very important. And when we feel ignored, we can feel rejected, and particularly when we try to tell a story to people and they silence us, they interrupt us, they ignore our pleas for listening, then we can feel very broken and stressed and rejected. And when we give unasked for advice, it makes the other person feel small. It makes us feel like, I'm not a complete idiot. Don't you know that if I could do this myself, I would have done it? Advice is not the most comforting thing. We often feel quite insulted when people give us unasked for advice, particularly if they haven't really heard what we need and we haven't asked them for advice. And this is where, telling people how to listen can be helpful. Say, right now, I don't need advice. That's fine. I just need you to know. I just need to know you're listening to me. And that's all I need right now is a listening ear so that I can shape my story, find a way to express myself and feel that I can understand myself better and you can understand me better too. So the unhelpful listening is also when we insist on telling our story. So someone will start to tell us something. Maybe we feel a little bit uncomfortable. Where is this going to go? Can I manage the sadness? And we will quickly tell a story of our own to distract from the person's painful story. And that can be really sad for the person who's desperately trying to tell their story. I taught some teenagers how to listen to each other's stories one time, and they were just amazed because they all said, when I talk, I don't feel anybody listens. We all talk, but none of us feel anyone listens. But now I've really felt what it's like to be heard, and people are not just telling their stories over me. I want to listen to other people the same way because it's an amazing gift. So keep your stories for another time. If someone needs to talk, then they need to talk, and you can do your storytelling in another place. But the unspoken questions under many people's concerns and communication, particularly when they're distressed, they have these big questions that they need to know. Do you really care about me? They won't say these things out loud, but their heart is saying them. Can you understand what I'm feeling right now? Can you empathize with me? Are you willing and able to support me when I'm struggling? Can I depend on you? Can I trust you to keep my confidence, to be there for me when I need you? And these are the questions that are often they're in their heart when they're telling us their stories. They need to know that they are cared for, they're significant, that we understand them, that we want to help them and they can trust us. And the way that we listen can help people to experience this care, this understanding, this support, this safe place to be. And we can communicate that in the way that we listen and respond to them and show that we care. We can show that we understand and identify their feelings, offer to support where they're struggling, and let them know they can trust us. And when we do all of those things, they're less likely to get stressed and argue with us and other things as well. When we live out relationships where all those questions are answered well through kindness, through understanding feelings, through support and appreciation, then we have a much happier relationships. So what's the helpful listening? Well, when you give me eye contact and time to talk, I feel really special. Eye contact lets us know that they're listening. They're not looking at their phone. They're not looking at their watch. They're not looking out the window, because when you give me eye contact, I know that I'm the one person in the world you are focusing on right now. When you ask questions to make sure you understand what I'm saying, I feel connected. So you can hear, but when you ask a question that I know you've really thought about what I've said, you've really formulated a useful question, then that helps the person to feel really understood and connected. So your question might be even just, so when do you feel most sad? What is happening around you when you feel most sad? When you had that difficult situation, how did you resolve it? And how are things better now? So these questions that show that you're really listening are helpful. When you recognize and accept my feelings, I feel your care. When someone says, oh, that sounds so sad, that sounds like such a challenging experience, that sounds so painful, And often in English, the word so stressed, and a sentence that drops at the end expresses more concern, but it's different in different languages. That sounds so sad. And that modulation helps people to feel more comforted. If I say that feels so sad, it's not the same, it's almost dismissive. So we need to be aware of the tone of our voice when we do that. So a helpful listening, when we give people an open space to talk freely, we give them an amazing gift. And when we know better how to respond to their sadness, we can often feel more confident in listening to them and their challenging and difficult and painful stories. So going back to eye contact. So when we're actually listening, I'm going to talk about the different parts of our face and body that we can use to show we're listening well. And this helps us to listen well, but it also helps us to listen really thoroughly and to show the other person that we really are paying attention. When we don't just listen with our ears, we listen with our eyes, our mind, our mouth, our heart, and our hands. So eye contact shows that we are really interested in them, as I mentioned before. And as a counsellor, I was taught, when you're the listener, give eye contact 100% of the time. When they're talking, show that they are the focus of your attention. But when you're speaking, look away 50% of the time, just so it's not too intense. So it's okay when you are speaking to look away somewhere, to be thoughtful. And we often do that. It's interesting that when we're thinking, we might look in different directions. It's almost as if we're looking back into our memories in our head, our brain, for some extra help. And so this is a good rule of thumb, to give 100% eye contact when you're the listener and 50% if you're the speaker. If you can't see the person because they're on the phone, just picture them in your mind and write brief notes at times to remind you what was being said. Sometimes I will look at them, but maybe quickly write something on a big piece of paper on the table in front of us, so they can see that I'm listening. They've seen that I'm writing down the points of what they're saying, and they can see them too. And sometimes that's helpful as well. So we listen with our ears and we hear those words, and it's actually helpful to summarize what they said. And this sometimes feels a bit funny, but we can sum it up quite quickly. So you're saying that when this and this happened, that's when you felt most sad, or you felt so alone when this happened. And then such and such happened after that. So you said you felt really sad and you started to cry. And then someone came and hugged you, and that felt better. So by summing up what they said and showing that you've heard what happened, it shows that we're really listening well, and it makes us conscious of our listening. And actually teaching people to listen in that way, that they sum up what the other person said, they don't try to interject any of their own thoughts, is a pattern of listening that often calms people when they are distressed or might even get into an argument with you. So it sounds like you're really frustrated about that. I don't say angry about that. I usually say frustrated, because it's easier for them to hear that. Sounds like you're really frustrated about that. When that happened, that was like so annoying to you. Let me think what we can do now to help you possibly. But by acknowledging their frustration and understanding that can help them to calm down and be less frustrated or angry. Then we can be curious, as I mentioned before, ask questions that invite more information and ideas. Because when I ask a question that invites them to tell more of the story, then they feel, wow, they're really listening to me and they want to hear more. I'm not trying to shut them down quickly because I have something else I want to go and do. So just asking one or two questions that invite more information or clarify something you don't understand shows that you're really thinking about the story, and the story is important to you and you want to hear more. Then we can listen to their story with our heart as well as our mind. We can respond to their emotions, imagine what they are feeling, empathize with them. And again, this sounds really sad or frightening or troubling. So we can see how what we say, what we think, what we're feeling can all come together to help us listen and respond well. I wonder what you were feeling then if they don't tell you. You know, maybe they need some feeling words to help them think about that. But when we listen to the feelings that are happening, it shows that we care about those feelings. We're not afraid of them expressing them. They are, we can identify them and help them to express them and make their feelings feel okay to share. So we can listen to their story with our heart and say, I'm so sorry you went through that. I'm sorry you had to go through that alone, and show that we are so compassionate to their story. As Paul said, be happy with those who are happy and be sad with those who are sad. So match your emotional tone to theirs by being sad when they're sad, being sad with them. I'm so sad that you are so sad. And that being with, you know, when you shared that story with me, I could feel sad too. I could feel how hard that was for you. And I want to let you know that your sadness touched me and I care about that. Then we can listen for the needs of the heart. So the heart has many needs in our relationships. Yes, we want to feel loved, but love looks like comfort or acceptance. If they made a mistake, acceptance, grace, forgiveness. Maybe it's affection and kindness. They really want someone to care practically for them. Maybe they need some appreciation for what they've done. Maybe they are frustrated and burnt out because they feel like they poured their heart and soul into something and nobody noticed, no one appreciated them. And that's quite heartbreaking. And for you just to say, I really appreciate what you did. That was amazing. Even if no one else noticed, I can appreciate that you did that right here, right now. They need attention, respect, encouragement, to feel safe, to feel valued, to need some support. These are the needs of the heart. And when I'm listening to people tell their stories, I have a list of these needs in my mind, and I go through and I think, I wonder what they most need right now. Maybe they need comfort, but maybe they need someone to be kind to them because they're pouring themselves out to others. Maybe they need some encouragement because it feels like a very long journey that they're on, and they need to know that they can have some encouragement. Maybe they just need to know they are special to me, or that I'm here to help them. So I listen for those needs underneath what people say, and I check them out. You know what? It sounds as if you could use some extra help there. I wonder who could help you, or what would be the best way to help you? Do you think? What would you like the most? If I said to you, I've got an hour to help you, what would you like me to do? And that sounds really practical. Or I might say to them, oh, that sounds really sad. I wonder who else would like to comfort you if only they knew how sad you're feeling. Maybe someone in your family needs to know that you're feeling this way. Who could you let know, and who would be most likely to comfort you? So, and then there's our hands. Ask the person if it's appropriate, what kind of help they most need. And then if it's something you can do what you can to help, or point them to someone who can help. Don't feel you have to solve everyone's problems, but you know, say, what can I do now? I've listened and I've heard your story, and it's so sad, it's touched my heart. And I want to know if there's anything that I can do to help you. You might say, you know, I've got half an hour right now, or I've got some time next week, or what would be most useful to you? And sometimes they might say, oh, just talking was helpful. But if there is some help they need, then help them to access that help in the best possible way. And remember, it doesn't always need to be you. So as I sum up listening with our body, we can start by listening with our eyes. As they begin to talk, give them eye contact to show they have our full attention, because when we give them our full attention, then our ears can work better. And we can listen to the details on what they're saying and what is not being said. And when we're looking at them and giving them 100% attention when they're talking, we can notice other things too, their body language, other signs of distress. We can see if their tears well up in their eyes, and maybe pass them a tissue or give them a hug or touch their hand. And then our mouth can reflect back what they said, just to check we've heard well. We can say, so this is what you were saying. It sounds really sad hearing what you were saying. So you said this and this happened, and then this happened, and then this is how you felt. So we find different ways to let them know that we've heard their story, we've got it in our minds, we understand it, we've captured it, so that we are informed what to do next. And then we can also ask some questions, and our mouth and mind work together to ask those thoughtful questions that might help them to tell more, help you to understand more about them, help them to express things that they might not otherwise have expressed. And then think about what they're saying, be really thoughtful, respond to what they're saying in thoughtful ways, be curious to find out more. And then we listen with our heart as it's gone through. We've listened with our ears, we've responded with our mouth and our mind, and to feel those emotions in our heart, listen for the needs of their heart, the encouragement, the support, the comfort, the attention, the affection, the appreciation, the different dimensions of love that they might need to help them through this situation. And then, how can I help? What can I do? And then to do what you can. So this is just a simple way that I help people learn how to listen well. And you might think, well, kind of, all of that. But there's often something more we can learn about listening. And even though I'm a family therapist and I've been a therapist for nearly 20 years, I'm always learning more about how to listen well. It's something we all need to work on, because even as a therapist, there are times when I tune out and I don't listen as I should. And I need to think, what is stopping me listening? What's getting in the way here? And look inside myself to think about what those blocks and fears might be, and take them out and pay attention in the moment to the person who was listening. And then when we speak, I love this verse in closing, that to say only what helps, each word a gift. And this verse really inspires me, because I like to think that I can scatter these gifts in all kinds of places. Saying what helps are really simple, easy gifts, and yet they can be so encouraging to those around us. So I try to listen for the needs of the heart, and to say something that might be just what they need to hear right now. Even someone, a colleague or someone at the checkout in a supermarket, you can see they're tired, they're frustrated, and sometimes an encouragement, a kind word, a smile can be a gift that can be helpful. So when we realize that all of our words and all of our listening can be gifts to those around us, they can become very precious, and to share our love and God's love with those whom we encounter every single day. Thank you.